So let me give you, I think this is a very timely time to be discussing Peru. How do I go to the next one? Just like this? Okay, great, thank you. And I think amid external and domestic uncertainty is the right title because the world is in the midst of a lot of uncertainty. But I think Peru, we're going to have elections in less than a year. And usually when Peru has elections, there's a lot of uncertainty and there's nothing different. So I'm going to talk about both things. But before that, usually when one thinks about Peru, one thinks about sort of the miracle of a country that got its act together. And we had an economic transformation. I think one important key turning point was the Constitution of 1993 when it was approved. It changed our economic model towards a market economy, a very open economy, and very strong macroeconomic fundamentals were enshrined into our own constitution. So very briefly, I said 2019 because it came the pandemic and there was a major shock which made clear all the challenges that we have in our economy, which I'll delve into at the end of the presentation. So we grew, we were a fast-growing economy. Exports were part of the engine of our growth. And I think one key fact is that stability has been key to our economy in spite of a lot of political instability. Peru is sometimes referred as to the Italian case of having continuous changes in government. But in spite of that, the sol, the exchange rate remains flat. And so it's a little bit of a puzzle to understand. Very quickly, there are three pillars. Macroeconomic stability, as I mentioned, has been one that has remained. We have a lot of international agreements, trade agreements with the US. We thought it was a stable framework to boost trade and investment. There's some question marks we'll go into. And we've been part of the APEC trading bloc since several years ago. And last year, Peru was a host of APEC meetings. So that was a major push. And I think our bet towards openness has been something that has actually become a state policy. Different governments have actually pursued the same line. And market-based institutions, from property rights, very liberal constitution, and very favorable framework for foreign investment. It's one of the few countries, I think, in the region that has equal treatment between foreign and domestic investors. And protection of property rights and of contracts is written into our constitution. And so that has given a lot of comfort. And Peru in the past 30 years has seen FDI explode 75-fold, from nothing to a lot of FDI. So, but usually when one thinks about Peru, one thinks about our governor of a central bank, who's going to be now 20 years in office, Julio Velarde. I had the pleasure to appoint him in his second bid. And he's been, and the independent central bank has been one of the key pillars of stability. So now inflation is below 2%. We have a target between 1% and 3%. And Peru has been accumulating a lot of reserves, more than the Latin American average. We have close to 30% of our international reserves, which give a lot of confidence towards have buffers to deal with external shocks. So this is usually the key thing, and usually when one talks about the Peruvian currency, and you look at a long time period, this is 24 years. And really, throughout this period, and it's the red line that you see in the graph, the sol has remained very, very stable vis-a-vis the dollar. Just as a comparison, you had the Brazilian real lost value almost 200%, vis-a-vis the sol, which in this long period had a depreciation of 3%, 25 years. So that's something really reflective of a country that used to be really unstable macroeconomically, and that has a very, very dirty floating exchange rate regime, but a country that believes in, doesn't pursue capital controls or anything, and very open and stable exchange rate, which I think is the thermometer of an economy, of the confidence that investors and economic agents feel towards an economy. So over the past 23 years, we've been growing at fast rates. During my time in office, we grew 6% on average. Now it's 4% in the past 20 years. And there's been a stagnation in our economy. From growing at fast rates, now we're growing at half of what we used to grow 10 or 12 years ago. And I think this has to be addressed, lack of reforms in the country to boost productivity, which is one of the main issues that we face, and a large informal sector, which is something that different studies say Peru has 25 percentage points of excess informality for our income per capita level. So those are issues I'll address in a little bit. And as an economy, this is investor sentiment. A line before 50 is below 50 is pessimistic, above 50 is optimistic. This is a poll that is monthly taken by the central bank. Obviously, you have the collapse during the pandemic, the COVID-19 years, but then there's been a recovery in spite of a lot of political instability that has actually been with us for the past since 2016, as a matter of fact, almost 9 years of instability being normalized in the economy. So that's the history. Now let me go in towards the outlook for this year. And of course, let's begin with external risks. These are very, very important because Peru, as a small open economy, depends pretty much on what happens in the rest of the world. And this is a study that is updated yearly by the Ministry of Finance, which actually puts a weight on external factors. And 60% of the variability of our GDP growth is really linked with external factors, namely global growth, export prices, access to market, capital markets, etc. And these are the things that have been in the news, and these are the things that are changing quite dramatically the past few hundred days. As a matter of fact, today, which is a date to evaluate the first 3 months of the current U.S. administration. So usually how shocks are transmitted into our countries through terms of trade and through access to market. And in both cases, I think the strengths of Peru lie in terms of very high terms of trade. Price of gold is really, really high as an asset. When there's uncertainty, people and agents buy gold, and the price of gold has been going up the roof. And that has actually helped that has enabled our terms of trade to be relatively high, and that gives a buffer for more challenging times. And the spread for our sovereign debt has remained low. Chile and Peru are the countries that have the lowest spreads, perhaps along with Uruguay and Dominican Republic, and that's it. The rest of the countries have had high spreads and less competitive access to capital markets. So going to the US, and here the bottom line is that my worry really is not the bilateral implications of tariffs, but really the effect that this may have in the world, given the trade war that we're seeing and this a pause that has been pragmatically pursued by the U.S. administration. But if you look at Peru's trade balance with the U.S., it's been a deficit over the past few years. Ever since we signed a free trade agreement, we've imported more than what we've exported. And so we thought that Peru was safe, wasn't in the blacklist, because most of our trade was tariff-free. But then we were imposed with 10% reciprocal tariff April 2nd or April 1st in Liberation Day. And ever since, we've seen a lot of turmoil in markets. And when one looks at the 10 main products that we export to the U.S., it's primarily agro-industrial products. Peru has become #1 producer of blueberries in the world, of fresh grapes in the world, and the main market is the U.S. So this is important because there may be some effects in the U.S. market, but overall, I think I would tend to say that our concern really is more towards slower growth in the world and how that may transmit into the Peruvian economy, which hasn't happened, thankfully, until now. And there are differentiated costs and opportunities. Here, let me bring your attention to our coffee exports to the U.S. and our grape exports to the U.S. So in 2023, we sold more or less 250 million to the U.S. And we were competing with countries such as Vietnam, Indonesia, and now they have higher tariffs to pay. So we become more competitive in spite of having a 10% tariff levied to our coffee producers. So that's an opportunity. But on the other hand, given the fact that Mexico's grapes and avocados enter the U.S. market without paying tariffs, with tariff zero, we've lost competitiveness in the U.S. market. So there's a bit of everything going on. I think our embassy is negotiating along with our authorities, trying to negotiate and reach an agreement with the U.S. administration. But I think this is something that the market will accommodate, and I don't see this as a big topic and a big effect in comparison to other countries. This is something that does worry me sometimes, which is sort of the perceived notion that Chinese investment is taking control of Peru completely. And this is something that one has to be mindful. You probably heard of the Chancay port, which started last November when we hosted the APEC meeting and President Xi went to Peru. And the key administration, someone linked to the current administration, the former IDB president, Mauricio Claver Carone, he said, no, any product that passes through Chancay should have a 60% tariff. And all the alarms were set. What's going on? And this is a port that's just beginning. But I think one needs to put the issues in context, because there's a lot of Chinese FDI going into mining and to energy, to infrastructure. But still, if you look at the stocks, Chinese FDI represents 5% of total investment, which is a fraction of the investment that comes from European countries, Chile, and the US. So I think one needs to be quite cautious and quite clear with the data that China is growing in its presence in a diversified manner, but it's not really the main source of FDI in the country at all. And the flows, yes, but not looking at stock levels. And the port of Chancay is a source of potential tension with the US, given the promise that this port has in terms of reducing logistic costs between Peru and really South America with China and Asia more broadly. This is something that's just beginning. There's 1 day a week that Chinese cargo goes from Chancay to Shanghai. This will grow in time. But the promise is really the Brazilian market and the production from our neighbors towards China. And as a matter of fact, as a smart decision made by the investors, is that the scanners, the custom scanners, were donated by the U.S. so as to give more comfort, so that there were no other business beyond trade going on. So I think this is something that has to be appropriately mitigated and managed with the right information, not to fall into a sort of a fight between the giants and Peru in the middle. No, and this is something that we obviously want to avoid. And thankfully, we have a very diversified set of trading partners. The U.S. represents around 13 or 14% of our market for exports, which means that 87% goes to other countries. China, obviously, is our main trading partner, and it's primarily commodities, copper, among others. But we have a set of very diversified trading partners. And the interesting thing is that we have a lot of free trade agreements in force, or free trade agreements that have been, now they are less binding we thought they were. But still, this is a source of competitiveness, and more than 80% of our trade, of our trade with the world, has some preferential trade agreement. And this is something that is very important, and Peru is still pursuing. The last agreement that came into effect was with Hong Kong. The Chinese FTA was optimized. I think they reached a negotiation with Guatemala last week. And this is a continuous fact of pursuing trade agreements with our partners. And this will help us deal with, a more closed economy, national, more protectionist winds blowing in the world, not only because of the US, but in general, in different industrialized countries. So that's the world. So the bottom line here is we are not, we shouldn't be as concerned, but this is something that if the trade war continues, exacerbating and dislocating supply chains, and actually China is not able to pursue countercyclical policy to mitigate a lower growth, this will affect us, definitely. So let me turn quickly to domestic risks. And here, obviously, there's something that Peru has been in the news, which has been all the presidents that we've had in the past since 2016. And this is unusual to have all these a high rate of turnover of presidents and of cabinets and of Congress. And this you see, and it's quite telling, because Peru usually was a country that said, well, while the politics is really not very stable, the economy it goes into a different, it's in a different channel, AM, FM, but this no longer is the case. And a channel of transmission is the tenure of ministers. So to tell you my case, I was in office for almost 45 months, and the average tenure of a finance minister in Peru now is 6 months. And obviously you look at other sectors like Interior, like the ministry that deals with citizen and security, crime and violence, the average tenure is 2 months. So with this, it's very, very unlikely to pursue policies, public policies. And this, we had in the administration of Alan Garcia, for instance, a minister was 20 months on average in tenure, in office. And this has really gone down tremendously. And so this is a way that many decisions get stalled, and there's no counterpart because it keeps on changing all the time. And this obviously affects investors and citizens that don't have someone to deal with in a continuous way. And obviously there's a very strong dissatisfaction with our president, with our Congress, with our local governments. We were affected by corruption probes, and this has led to a very, very an environment of a lot of mistrust. President Boluarte has about 3 or 4% approval rating, and the Congress has like 4 or 5, or vice versa. So that's something that you couldn't imagine anywhere else with this very, very low approval ratings. And this is something that is of concern, obviously, looking towards our next election. So if you look in terms of our general welfare indicators, we're haven't yet recovered in terms of our average real per capita expenditure or different indicators. We haven't fully recovered pre-pandemic levels. I think we're going to be seeing official figures published in a month or so, and there should be an improvement because of growth of over 3% last year and low inflation. But still, the economy hasn't fully recovered vis-a-vis other economies that are now put the pandemic behind. Peru is still, trying to recover. I think one example, for instance, is foreign travelers into Peru, which, if you've been to Peru or you're Peruvian, you know about our wonders, our cuisine, Machu Picchu, everything. But we receive less visitors than El Salvador, than Chile, than Colombia, 3.5 million foreign visitors when we used to receive 4.5 million, which is 10% of what Mexico receives. So really, we haven't still recovered in many instances our pre-pandemic levels. And this is reflected in terms of poverty. Poverty has grown in Peru, and in particular, urban poverty. And this has been compounded by migration flows. We are host to about 1.5 million Venezuelan migrants into the economy, and that has actually stressed our public services in the country. And we have a very heterogeneous country. One goes into the averages, the aggregate averages gives you a view, but we have parts of the region of the country that you have 1 in 2 people being poor. And very rich parts, Cajamarca, for instance, is where most of the copper and gold reserves are, and it's one of the poorest regions in the country. So I think this is something that progress is expected this year, but still this is something that our macroeconomic success hasn't enabled us to actually deal with having a more socially cohesive country. And this is something interesting. This is access to basic services, the different cuts, urban areas, rural areas, poor households, non-poor households. And you compare 2019 before the pandemic and 2023, which is the latest data available. And beyond access to internet, in most cases, access has gone backwards or has remained stalled. And this in spite of an injection of public resources put into the investments in these basic services. So there's this issue of a country that is very angry with its authorities. And I think there's some reason to be angry because in spite of being appropriately managed, a lot of resources being put into public investment, public works, and citizens are not feeling sort of the effectiveness of these services, and people are annoyed in many parts of Peru. So going towards these sources of being annoyed and to be able to wrap up and to enjoy a conversation with Alex and with you guys here. One of the key structural challenges that we have is our low productivity. And low productivity is very important because it's really the source of higher salaries. And this is something I usually quote, and my colleagues in Lima get a little bit, they don't like this, but the output that is produced by one Chilean worker needs to be provided by 3 Peruvian workers. So there's a big productivity problem in Peru that is something to be concerned. Our productivity has stalled, and the reforms to improve labor productivity, the quality of education, etc., and the regulations that we face are quite anti-productivity. And this is a reform agenda still pending in the country. And you see it in high informality ratios. 3 out of 4 Peruvians don't have access to pension or don't have access to basic health services, and they really rely on daily activities to be able to meet their needs. And we're among the poorest countries in the region: Bolivia, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and this is something very much tied to the question of low productivity that we have in the economy. And this we tie it with Peru's lack of a functional and transparent government. So this is something that I already addressed, the high turnover rate of authorities at all levels, the corruption and misconduct. We have a controller's office that doesn't really work, has paralyzed many decision-making. And planning is an absent word in our country. You know, we went from central planning in the 80s, 70s, and 80s to no planning. And it's really a bit of a chaos. And you see it if you visit Lima, and you see the chaos, you know, to go from the airport to wherever you're going. Everything is chaotic. Everything is informal. And that's something that puts a dent really towards our prospects. And this is something that I usually, when I talk to my friends in Congress, and they are very, always a lot of hunger for resources. You look at the budget spent in education and health in any sector, which has in the past 10 years doubled or tripled in quantity being spent, and you look at the results. You look at reading comprehension results, and they've actually remained the same, or even anemia prevalence has gone up for children below 36 months, or the quality of our infrastructure has remained quite poor and among sort of the laggards in the region. So there's this disconnection between resources, public investment, and the quality of that investment and the impact that society is perceiving from that. And so to wrap up, well, elections. Every time we have elections, every 5 years, when we had 5-year periods, now we hope to return to relatively stable 5-year periods of having a president complete his or her tenure. This is something that usually paralyzes Peruvians. And this is important if you look at how fragmented the political spectrum is in Peru. We have, as of today, 41 parties running for office. And that's really an issue that, once again, how do you elect among 41 parties? And this has doubled the number of parties that we had last general election 5 years ago. And we have very much polarized polity between pro-market and statist views. I think the pro-market has more traction nowadays, but we have also this cleavage between conservative and progressive, as in the US, for instance. So this is something that we're going into elections next April, very much confused and with no clue who will win the election. And if you look at the different general elections from 2006 till the last one, this is how the second round results show. The red is sort of the statist, left radical voting in the country, and the orange is Ms. Keiko Fujimori, which may run again, along with other people that are seeking to run for office. So this is a bit dysfunctional and a bit of the usual uncertainty that we have every time we go to the polls. And there's two issues that are going to play an important role in this election. We have illegal mining, especially illegal gold mining, which have representation in our Congress. And with the price of gold where it is, there's more illegal activity going on in different parts of the country. In the north, and this is something really, really of concern. And this is, the authorities are losing control in spite of emergency decrees and really, really ineffective policies. And the other one is that people are afraid because of high citizen insecurity. And this has really put that, my guess is that these things are going to shape electoral preferences. I think if you ask the average Peruvian, perhaps what most people would say, that they're sick of instability, of chaos, and they're really scared about crime. And this is not unique of Peru. Many countries are facing the same problem, but Peru, this is compounded with the presence of illegal groups financing campaigns and having political participation. So this is something that we'll see how it unfolds going forward. So we talk about certain risks. There are mitigating factors. our macroeconomic resilience, our balance sheets of banks, of firms, of the government is sound, which is very good in comparison to other countries. And we have institutional locks that mitigate a lot of these risks. I haven't mentioned them all, but you have them in the slide. And basically, I think our economy is quite resilient. I think no one has doubt about this. And again, once again, the exchange rate is a key indicator of that resilience. But this uncertainty in the world may affect our growth prospects. Our finance minister upgraded his projection for higher growth for this year for 4%, but he was counting on a world that would be growing and trade would be an engine of such growth. Now there's question marks about that. And obviously we have a pending reform agenda to deal with low productivity, high informality, and public sector reform to make it more effective and transparent. And we have decentralized responsibilities in the country among 25 regional governments and close to 2,000 local governments that compete for resources and that haven't proven to be very effective in their role. So what to expect? Hopefully the economy will remain resilient and we won't go to vote, as upset as we went to vote last time around, and we had the outcome that we had with two candidates adding up to 25%, Mr. Castillo and Ms. Fujimori at the time. And we've seen the results of these, and the risk is of this happening again. That's sort of the main takeaway, not too upbeat, but and with this I finish. So thank you very much.
So, Luis Miguel, thank you very much for such a complete and deep presentation on a little bit the recent history of Peru, recent growth outlook, and the current challenges, both economically and politically, that Peru is facing. Let's start the conversation, and then we open it up to your questions on the short term. I mean, you mentioned relatively good growth for Latin American standards, but on the other hand, you had a chart in which you show that Peru has not fully recovered the levels, GDP per capita, et cetera, that it had pre-pandemic. And in that sense, it's, I think, maybe the worst of the large countries in Latin America in terms of its recovery. What explains, I mean, having such a strong macroeconomy compared with regional standards, that Peru was not able to have a stronger post-pandemic recovery? And then you mentioned that Peru could do much better if it were to implement important structural reforms. What are the main reforms that you have in mind?
Sure. Thank you, Alex. And a lot of the reforms were copied when he was in the IMF, and he helped us see the light when Alex was heading the Western Hemisphere department at the IMF. When we met, actually, we became friends at the time. But I think what we see is that doing business in Peru has become more complicated because of regulations and red tape. You look at the different opportunities that we have in mining and infrastructure in different sectors. And actually, decision making has become quite stalled, and I think this is a legacy of the corruption years, the lavajato, that actually paralyzed decision making in the country. So this put a sort of a ceiling or a cap to our growth. That's one thing. The other thing is that we haven't had major mining projects go into production mode. The last one was Las Bambas, a Chinese copper mine. And we haven't had this because of social conflicts, badly managed social conflicts, which is also a reflection of the fact that we have a lot of resources, a lot of royalties and transfers, but they're not felt by local populations, and this is sometimes used by political, opportunistic interests to actually paralyze things. So that's the second. Thing, and obviously the fact of having such high turnover rate doesn't provide for policy continuity. So our natural growth rate used to be 6%. Now it's 2.5%. But we have the capability really of growing without introducing macroeconomic disequilibria in the future, at least 2 more points, 3 to 5% on average for the next decade. We could, because all the sort of the balance sheets of households, of firms, of the governments, of the banking sector are sound. You look at Argentina's issues, and we don't have those issues in Peru. You look at Colombia or Ecuador, and we don't have those issues, thankfully. So there's the basis to really have higher private investment growth. So I think that's one of the reasons. And if I have to choose reforms which have been very difficult to undertake with this level of fragmentation and lack of representation in our congressmen or women, is the political economy of doing reforms has become very, very difficult in Peru, because we have governments without majority in Congress. It's all a negotiation for survival in most cases. And I think the long-needed reforms, such as improving your civil service, which was approved during my time in 2013, we approved a major civil service reform so that institutions look more like the central bank and less than what they actually look like. That hasn't received traction because politicians don't see, they don't see the advantages or the benefits of those reforms. You see them in long term. And I think civil service is quite important. Changing sort of the contralorias, the controllers, way that they act, that they try to punish everyone, and so corruption remains, but paralysis also remains as a legacy of these times. And the third is really rethinking our decentralization, because we had decentralization responsibilities and resources transferred from the central government to regional governments 20 years ago, which has utterly failed. And we have this 25 little kings or queens. If you touch one of their resources, they would, be not very happy and add to the social conflictivity of Peru. So those are the institutional reforms that we need to really work so as to unlock our potential, which is really huge.
And on the political side, it's a major hurdle. Two questions. One, you mentioned the positive things in Peruvian constitution regarding the economy. Basically establishing at the constitutional level a lot of economic principles that actually support private investment, support the market economy, support property rights, etc. On the other hand, the political chapters of what we're seeing in Peru is the level of political disintegration, atypical of Latin American countries. And in that sense, are there elements in the Peruvian constitution that actually contribute to this fragmentation where you have, more political parties than football teams? You have, those levels of approval of 3 and 4% for the political system. Is there a structural factor that actually is facilitating that to happen, or is more a conjunctural situation in Peru?
I think it's very much structural, because if you look at Peru is a very peculiar system because it's a combination of very presidentialistic mandate with parliamentary schemes. You have vote of confidence. A president can dissolve Congress. So things that you see in parliamentary systems, but we don't have a parliamentary system. We have a presidential system. So I think these are the checks and balances of a stable democracy have been eroded. We don't have political parties. We have associations of people that join every 5 years to go into office. And there are many, many issues that need to get reformed. One important reform which was approved, which may put a filter for better legislation. Peru is trying to get access to the OECD. I see that as a long-term goal. But one of the issues is to improve the quality of the legislation we approve, Congress approves, with appropriate regulatory standards. And this is something that has not been able to, this may help because we're moving from a single chamber to a bicameral with a new Senate and a lower chamber, assuming that there's the right incentives for honorable people to go to the Senate and to have appropriate checks and balances between the upper and the lower chamber to improve the quality of the legislations. So a lot of the political issues are really important pending political reforms that need to be pursued to have to go from this unstable equilibrium to a better one.
Very interesting. Let's open it up to questions from the floor. Yeah, I think.
Hello, thank you very much. My question comes more out of a sense of frustration. I am Peruvian myself, I should note. More of a sense of frustration than any rational thinking. But I do have to, when we, the story of the Peruvian miracle is one where the economy is successful, but the political system, institutional stability sort of is crumbling. And we talk about electoral reforms and we talk about political party reforms. I do always wonder what role political leadership plays, particularly, at the presidential level, where we have seen, as the slide showed,